Sometimes a disappearance can be extremely difficult to explain, but this gets increasingly more difficult when multiple take place around the same time in the same area, which is the case for the 36 square mile piece of land known as Bennington Triangle. Situated in southwestern Vermont around Bennington and Glastenbury Mountain, this is an area soaked with history and mystery. It was on April the 4th, 1892, when 38-year-old Henry McDow brutally bludgeoned John Crowley to death with a rock. He soon fled to Connecticut, where he was quickly apprehended, and he confessed to his crime. However, McDow claimed to have heard voices in his head that he was unable to get rid of. Regardless, he was sent to Vermont State Asylum located in Waterbury, around 120 miles away from Bennington, but McDow managed to escape. He was never seen again, though some believe that he stowed away on a train and headed for Bennington. Local legend says that he died on the run and that his spirit still roams the mountain to this day. On September the 30th, 1897, Woodford resident John Harbour was in the area hunting with his brother. His brother suddenly heard a gunshot, followed by John's screams, claiming to have been shot. Despite his best efforts, he wasn't able to locate his body until the following morning, when he was already dead. His body had been positioned under a tree with a gun propped up next to him. Bizarrely, this was a great distance away from where they had actually been hunting. No clue or any evidence was left behind, and this death officially remains a mystery, though some believe that it was the cause of Henry McDowell still remaining at large in the area. Strangely, it was during the 1800s when there were reports of a creature dubbed the Bennington Monster wreaking havoc there. A huge 6-foot-tall, hairy, Bigfoot-like beast reportedly attacked a stagecoach, and nearby Native Americans were convinced that Glastenbury Mountain was sacred and cursed. Local legend also told the tale of a man-eating stone swallowing anyone who dare stand on it. This was only accompanied by several sightings and reports of UFOs, alien abductions, and even doors to other dimensions being in the area. But it wasn't until the 1940s when a long, bizarre string of disappearances took the world by storm. It was in 1943 when 37-year-old hunter Carl Herck was out hunting in the area with his cousin Henry, before they became separated from one another. Henry decided to return to camp, but much to his surprise, Carl never did. His body was found 3 days later, having been squeezed to death. His lungs had been punctured by his own ribs. Though there were no snakes in the area strong enough to constrict a human man, Henry did admit that there were bear tracks in the area that day, but officially, this remains unsolved. On November the 12th, 1945, 74-year-old Middie Rivers was out on a weekend hunting trip near the mountains. It was in the morning when he and his son-in-law Joe Lawson reached a fork in the road and decided to separate. Rivers claimed that he would, quote, only be going a short distance, end quote, before joining Joe and the rest of the group at lunch. He was an experienced outdoorsman and was extremely familiar with the local area, but despite this, Middie Rivers was never seen again. It was shortly after 3 PM when the rest of the hunting party began to search before getting the authorities involved. An extensive search only turned up a single rifle cartridge being discovered in a stream. They concluded that it simply fell out of Middie's pocket as he was leaning over the water. On December the 1st, 1946, 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College, Paula Jee Welden finished her shift at the dining hall before she returned to her dorm. She had attempted to get some other students to go out on a hike with her that afternoon, but they were all busy, so she decided to go it alone. She returned to her dorm to change into her walking clothes, and though she was dressed adequately enough for the afternoon weather, the temperature was due to drop significantly that evening. But Paula strangely didn't take any extra clothing to keep warm, nor did she pack a bag or take any money, suggesting that she fully intended on returning. Bennington Banner employee Ernest Whitman would later report seeing Paula leave the college, even providing her with directions. Paula headed down the campus driveway at around 2:45 PM before hitching a ride from State Route 67A near the college entrance to a point on State Route 9 near the Furnace Bridge, which was between downtown Bennington and Woodford Hollow. She was picked up by local contractor Lewis Knapp, who only drove her as far as his home on Route 9, which was around 2.5 miles away from the long trail where she was heading. Welden then either hitchhiked some more or walked the rest of the way there, as a group of hikers did spot her walking down the trail. Paula did approach them, asking them some questions about the area before walking north on what is now known as Harbour Road. As the darkness began to fall at around 4 p.m, Welden was spotted by an elderly couple who were around 100 yards behind her. They claimed that Paula turned a corner, and by the time they reached the same point, she had completely disappeared. Once her roommate returned to their dorm, she simply believed that Paula left to go and study, but once she didn't return in the morning, she alerted the college staff, who began the search themselves, bringing in the state attorney and the county sheriff. It didn't take long for the FBI to get involved, offering a $5,000 reward for any information regarding her whereabouts. Authorities used bloodhounds, helicopters, over 1,000 searchers including staff, students, family members, volunteers, National Guard troops and firefighters, but there was absolutely no sign of Paula Welden anywhere. The searches reached as far as Glastenbury Mountain, but there was nothing. Most assumed that she had simply got lost in the woods, while others believed she seemed in high spirits and decided to start a new life somewhere else, despite leaving all of her belongings and money behind. Some even considered the possibility of her committing suicide, but most leaned more towards homicide or abduction. Lumberjack Fred Godette lived on Harbour Road, and he came forward to claim to have been one of the last people to have seen her alive. He claimed to have been involved in a heated argument with his girlfriend at the time when he saw Paula Welden walk past, but Fred's story seemed to continuously change. Initially, he claimed to have stormed away from his girlfriend in a jealous rage and spent the rest of his evening alone in his shack. But then he claimed that he actually drove up the travel portion of the trail in the very direction Welden was heading towards. Godette had allegedly lied to officers several times and was actually a suspect for years. Made even worse when he reportedly told at least 2 people that he knew within 100 feet where exactly Paula Welden was buried, though he claimed that it was merely a joke. Despite all of this, there was no evidence to charge him with anything, and Paula Welden's disappearance remains a mystery. 3 years later, to the exact day, December the 1st, 1949, 68-year-old veteran James Tedford was in the area visiting some relatives. He was then taken to the local bus station, heading back to his residence at the Bennington Soldiers' Home, but he would never make it there. Strangely, several witnesses saw Tedford get on the bus, and he was spotted still on board at the last stop before Bennington. However, at some point between then and arriving at that stop, James Tedford mysteriously disappeared. His belongings were still left in the luggage rack, and an open bus timetable was found on his empty seat. Writing about the strange circumstances, author Tony Jinks wrote, quote, "The popular conception is that he vanished into thin air while on the bus, but like many missing person stories, there's a gap between when he was last seen and when he was reported missing a week or so later. Regarding Tedford's disappearance, there is enough evidence to suggest he did not dematerialize, even though no trace of him was ever found." End quote. It would only continue on October the 12th, 1950 with 8-year-old special needs child Paul Jepson. His mother left him unattended in her truck, supposedly for around an hour so she could go and feed some pigs. Once she returned, her son was nowhere to be seen. Some sniffer dogs did manage to pick up his scent along a logging road to an intersection of back roads near a stream close by to where Paula Welden had disappeared years earlier, but nothing was found. Despite numerous search attempts, Paul Jepson was never found, though his father claimed that he was wearing brown and tan clothing at the time, so it's possible that he could have blended in with the colour of the autumn leaves and could have been undetected. Paul had previously shown interest in wanting to climb the mountain in the days before he disappeared, so one theory is that he wandered off towards it and was then abducted on his way, but nothing is for certain. Just 16 days later, on October the 28th, 53-year-old Freda Langer and her cousin Herbert Elsner left their family campsite near the Somerset Reservoir to go on a hike together, before Freda accidentally slipped and fell into a stream. She decided to head back to the camp to get changed into some dry clothes and would then catch Herbert back up. However, once she never reached Elsner, he headed back to the camp, only for Freda to not be there, and for no one to have seen her. 5 extensive searches were conducted in the area over a 2-week period, including aircrafts, helicopters, and up to 300 searches, but no trace was found for around 7 months. It wasn't until May the 12th the following year when Freda Langer's body was found 3.5 miles from the campsite in the eastern branch of the Deerfield River. However, due to the poor condition of her body, it was impossible to determine the cause of death. All of these bizarre disappearances have led to several theories, one of which is that the hikers are merely knocked off the trail by strong winds. In the area, the wind blows the slope of the mountain during the day, but then down the slope at night. So it is a possibility that the wind knocked them into the greenery or the water. It was in 2008 when Robert Singley, a music composer at Bennington College, went for a hike in the area and lost his way, but he managed to survive. He was found the next day but left with an uneasy feeling of dizzying confusion, completely overwhelming him. Singley was an experienced hiker who was adequately dressed, knew the area and had excellent camping skills, which was most likely what led to his survival. However, he was 7 miles off where he thought he was, and when he had attempted to turn back, he found that the trail seemed completely foreign to him, showing just how easy it was in the area to find yourself lost. Another theory is that none other than Henry McDow was still at large, and he was responsible for all of the murders and disappearances. But in order for this to be true, if McDow was still alive, he would have been 89 years old at the time of the first disappearance. It was on September the 17th, 2019 when New York resident Jessica Hilden was found dead near the Somerset Reservoir, and it was concluded that she had been murdered, but the culprit remains a mystery. In August 2021, Joseph Citro, who had been missing for several weeks beforehand, was found dead in his truck at the same reservoir with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. This led to a third theory that all of these murders were carried out by the same serial killer. Though some disputed this, as serial killers usually target victims with similarities, while these victims all vary from age, gender and background. But some did notice a possible link between them. Paul Jepson and Paula Welden both had red jackets. Jessica Hildenbrandt's nickname was Red, and the truck where Joseph Citro was found was also red, leading some to speculate a possible connection between the victims, the killer, and the colour red. Disregarding the two modern-day deaths, it was very possible to have been a serial killer during the initial disappearances. Some other female hitchhikers did disappear in the New England area under similar circumstances during the same time period. On April 2nd, 1936, 22-year-old Katherine vanished from Lebanon Springs, New York, and her remains weren't found until 7 years later near the state border on the western slope of West Mountain in Hancock, Massachusetts, but they were unable to determine the cause of her death. This was only 40 miles away from Bennington, where all of the other disappearances took place. On July 26th, 1952, 10-year-old Constance Christine Smith ran away from Camp Sloan in Lakeville, Connecticut, and was last seen hitchhiking along Route 44. She was never seen again. This was only 78 miles away from Bennington, and considering Smith looked a lot older than she was, it was considered a possibility that she was picked up by a serial killer who had a preference for young women. But if this is the case, what about the disappearances that involved men? Where are all of the remains, and how many more will go missing in this particular area before we can stop seeking answers?